Hello, everyone. This is Min Q, and welcome to the first episode of Out of Town Radio. And before diving into the actual episode, I just want to send out a sincere and heartfelt thank you to everybody who sent the nicest and warmest messages to me regarding my earlier video about the future of the animation industry via astrology and human design. When I first decided to make that video, I actually released any and all expectations of what the reception to that video might be, because that topic of astrology and human design tend to be a little bit more esoteric in nature. And even though these days I do see both of those topics gaining a lot of popularity within creative circles or creative communities, it's still fairly esoteric and a lot of people might be unfamiliar with it. So I really didn't know what to expect by putting out that video. I just knew, gauging from the rising tension and anxiety within the film industry, that was something that I could actually offer perspective in that might help some people. So it was nice to see the response from everyone, and more than anything, I think, seeing that the takeaway of that video, despite talking about a lot of change happening, a lot of potential destabilization happening, that the takeaway was the hope and the optimism and the possibility that lies in opportunities of adaptation and realignment. And even on the other end of that realignment can be a much more artistically fulfilling life full of authenticity and integrity, artistic integrity. So thank you for that. And worth mentioning again, if there's anything that anyone wants me to, dive deeper into or elaborate on, anything to do with any and all of the topics that I mentioned, please feel free to, leave a comment or message me, and I'd be happy to, make a whole episode out of that too, if it feels connective and relevant. And case in point, I got a few DMs wanting to know more about the sort of individuation process that I talk about from the corporate studio system. So I'm actually planning on a multi-part series of episodes on that right now, kind of taking a very beginner-friendly approach of step-by-step breaking down, all the ways you can begin your creative alignment journey, because it is going to be, I think, a process and a transition. And I also received a few comments and messages wanting to know more about human design, which, I'm happy to talk about. So, I'm going to continue incorporating insights from astrology and human design that I think will really help with that process. So, in the end, you have more tools in your tool belt and perspectives that you can explore to further clarify your direction forward. So if that sounds interesting to you, please feel free to subscribe and tune in. And, funny enough, I had originally intended for that recording about the future of the animation and film industry to just be sort of like a one-off podcast episode, because I was just seeing, again, a lot of worry and anxiety rising in the larger film industry, and this felt like something that I can actually offer perspective in and help with. But I think maybe because I used the word podcast in it, a lot of people assumed that it was going to be an actual ongoing podcast, and that was actually an idea that I had a very positive response to. So today I am officially launching Out of Town Radio, name based on my independent comic website and label, Out of Town Comics, alongside with my new Substack and new Patreon, which will be the two primary platforms that I probably will be sharing almost everything on moving forward. So launching a few things here all at once. But really quick note on the Substack and Patreon. Both of them are going to be housing the exact same content. So whatever I post on one, I'll be posting on the other at the same time. So if you want to follow me and, everything that I share, you only need to subscribe to one, and there's really no need to subscribe to both at all. I'm actually going to be talking a little bit more about what I plan on sharing on my Substack and Patreon in a moment, but before getting into all of that, I do want to take a moment to just talk about this podcast that you are currently listening to, Out of Town Radio, and what I want it to be about, so I can properly introduce this podcast to you. And yeah, I was actually thinking about this yesterday when I was driving, asking myself how I would summarize this podcast and how I would describe what exactly my intentions are with this podcast, because I actually think it's going to be fairly diverse in the things that it explores and talks about. But one of the descriptions that popped up in my head was, within this world that we're in, that is going through some big changes and continues to break down and destabilize, which will also then undoubtedly come with all the more doom and gloom and catastrophizing headlines and attitudes that maybe incite more hysteria. I want this podcast to be like a mental oasis away from all of that also doesn't turn away from or sugarcoat the changes that are happening and maybe even fully acknowledges and explores it, but instead of just focusing on the negative aspects of this breakdown and destabilization, actually shining a light on how every beating wave of change can be an opportunity for realignment that actually leads you to a way more creatively fulfilling life, and that the world that is breaking down is potentially even breaking down for a very good reason, and exploring what that could be as well. And also, for that not to just be empty lip service or feel good platitudes, but also talking about the actual practical steps that you can take to further realign. So my ultimate pipe dream, I guess, for this podcast is that, whenever anyone feels swayed or disoriented by the alarming headlines, that they can come to this podcast and interact with it as a source of clarity and direction that actually feels grounding and provides that anchor and maybe even inspiration, even if it's in a small way. So I think in spirit, that is what I hope for this podcast to embody, and that's kind of what I'm working towards. But on top of that, I also just want to be talking about art in general, because I think talking about art is, well, in my opinion, just important in general, but I do think now it's more important than ever for a variety of reasons. And talking about art in this more critical way. And I don't mean like critical as in criticizing, but critical as in thinking. It's really good for and really important and necessary for the health and growth of art, period. And I'm a firm believer that, art and art criticism must go hand in hand. And again, that art criticism is necessary for the overall growth and expansion of what art is. And so that's going to be something that I want to be exploring more deeply with this podcast, talking about art and animation and film and culture in a very open and honest way. And lastly, I also want to be sharing a lot of my own life through this podcast, sharing where I'm at with my journey amidst all of this change. You guys heard kind of my perspective more purely from the perspective of the insights from human design and animation, but, leading to that question of, well, what am I doing about it? Well, what are the individual choices that I'm making in order to adapt and realign in this change, in hopes that that could just be one example that, again, you guys can put in the back of your minds or in your tool belt to just see that there are so many other ways of, living a fulfilling creative life. And yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of everything that I want to share with this podcast. And now to just briefly talk about my Substack and Patreon and what it's going to house. So it will be where I share all my future episodes of Out of Town Radio. So both my Substack and Patreon will have episodes of this podcast that will be accessible through the paid subscription option of both Substack and Patreon. And I'm also planning on some select episodes to also be available via the free subscription option via a delayed release, so like in a later date or something like that. And also, both these platforms will be where I share all my future episodes of my graphic novels as well. So all future issues of The Merman and my second graphic novel that I'm working on right now that is yet to be released will be accessible again through the paid subscription option of my Patreon, while again through delayed release, maybe some select issues of both of those will also be available to the public via my website and the free subscription option. I'm also going to be sharing all the behind-the-scenes process posts of my art making through both of these platforms as well as a lot of exclusive art, a lot of tips and advice that I won't be sharing on my Instagram will also be accessible through both these platforms as well. And lastly, I'm going to be sharing a lot about just, I think, my life. You know, that's something that I actually never done before. But the idea of it sounded really exciting to me. So I hope that's something that can, hopefully provide to be at least one example of, how to go about this changing paradigm. So on that note, for the final portion of this episode, I wanted to share with everyone just what I'm up to right now, because I get that question a lot. What am I doing as an artist right now to carve my own path in these shifting paradigms, and, how I got here and what I hope the future to be. And, to answer that question, well, first of all, as many of you might know from what is publicly shown, I am creating graphic novels through my indie graphic novel website, which is Out of Town Comics. And under that label, I am creating 2 original web graphic novels right now. So the first of which I've released the prologue for, which is The Merman. And the second one I'm currently planning on releasing the bulk of through my Substack and Patreon. And alongside that, as I'm sure many are aware, I'm also running my human design and astrology consultation called Cosmic Garden, which also has been a really wonderful and really eye-opening and gratifying experience. And if you ever want a personalized, private, one-on-one human design or astrology reading, you can book with me through cosmicgarden.com, cosmic-garden.com, cosmic-garden.com. And one of the questions that I get often is, am I still pursuing animation? Do I still want to do animation? And the answer is absolutely yes. But it's just not going to be in the old world corporate studio paradigm of animation. It is going to be more creating my own film on my own terms with only the right people that I genuinely connect with. After spending 15 years in the West Coast corporate studio animation system, I'm at a point where I just have so much clarity on everything about it and how it's just absolutely not the correct creative environment for me. And I actually suspect that it's actually not the correct creative environment for a lot of other creatives who are actively currently involved in it. But of course, in this capitalistic paradigm, people are forced to stay in it because, they have been conditioned to think that it's the only option for their survival, which, again, is another aspect that this podcast will be exploring to reveal how not only untrue that line of thinking is, but also what the potential damage, both personally and collectively, that kind of line of thinking can create. But after all of this time, this time spent in the West Coast animation industry, I finally feel like I have seen everything that the system has to offer, and more importantly, what it absolutely cannot offer, and what its limits are. And everywhere I look, I feel like I get nothing but confirmation of this. And one of the big revelations that I have time and time again is that there simply just has not been one single animated feature in the past decade of this industry for me, or more specifically, the West Coast animation industry within that bubble that actually genuinely made me excited or inspired me. And of course, you don't have to agree with that at all, that statement at all. And that doesn't have to be your truth, of course. But it is a truth for me, and one that feels really important to acknowledge. And I say that not as any sort of disrespect to anyone who's creating art within this system right now, but to really honor how important it is to speak that truth in honesty, because having talked to so many animation artists, I think that rings true for a lot of people. And I say that because, the first step of actually aligning or realigning is to have that total and radical honesty with yourself as an artist, and really verbalizing and expressing that truth that is important to you. And this is a very important truth to me now, And because without that, I don't think there is any healthy aligning or foundation building with your art. This truth that truly, when I look at the West Coast animation landscape and the products that they put out, that nothing really resonates or feels like truly time-tested, memorable, great works of art to me, is a foundational truth that also points me in the right direction, And I want to also talk more about, that too. What I do think makes a great work of art when it comes to an animated film, and why we currently seem to be living in this era of unmemorable animated films. But yeah, going back to that question, I am still deeply in love with animation, and I dream of making a couple animated features at least in my lifetime. But I can honestly say right now that I am in a place where I feel very happy and excited and content, knowing that I actually get to decide what my animation career is going to look like from now on. Of course, the fact that these corporate studio systems are kind of continuously becoming more and more unstable, and also, I think, important to acknowledge, generating an insurmountable amount of frustration in artists is only further proof I think I'm headed the right direction. And yeah, like I said, I'm also in this process right now of reestablishing and rebuilding my relationship to my art as an animator. And to elaborate on that a little bit more and maybe share a thought that is really helping me anchor my path right now, but also maybe a thought that I could leave everyone with to contemplate, is how the audience receives your work is actually none of your concern. Basically meaning that as an artist, however this imagined general conglomerate crowd in your mind reacts to the work that you put out, the reception of your work is not something that should dictate the truth or work that you are trying to creatively express as an artist. I just think there is so much wisdom in that. And yeah, I'm sure to some, when they hear that, that's going to come as a very iconoclastic and groundbreaking statement, I do think there are some people who are just never going to be able to understand that statement and the wisdom that lies in that. Especially for the people who are very executively conditioned in their mind and conditioned by the corporate paradigm of this industry to see everything as a product, that's okay, But it is an idea that I want to be expanding upon further in my next episode. But it is an idea that is really currently grounding me a lot right now in my direction. And to provide a little bit of context in that, as a human design reader and astrologer, I do get a fair amount of animation or film industry professionals as clients. Of course, everything that is shared within the consultation is protected under client confidentiality, and I don't ever share anything. And on top of that, I do get the privilege sometimes of being able to kind of offer a therapeutic perspective as also someone who is part of that industry and has gone through very, very similar things. So I know what they're talking about. But yeah, I would say about maybe a little less than a third of my astrology and human design clients are from within the film industry. Most, if not all of them, in this particular moment are very unhappy and disillusioned right now with the studios that they're in, or the films that they're on, or how the films that they're on are run, or the directors that they're working for, what have you. And what I genuinely believe is, once you enter this animation industry and you see how things are run, you begin to really accept that this is the only way to do things. And it is this very subconscious kind of insidious conditioning that happens that can be very, very deep and hard to spot because you just accept it as truth. But so many animation artists, in their soul, in their consciousness, right now they are feeling this very deep sense of frustration or dissatisfaction or bitterness with their creative life right now. And what I genuinely think, as also a astrologer and human design reader, is that it is stemming from this deep-seated belief system that they've bought into and are continuously being deeply conditioned by within this industry. And what I love about this statement, that how the audience receives your work is none of your concern, is that it begins to start the process of breaking that spell, And to credit that statement, I've heard that statement throughout my lifetime from various sources. I think the last place that I heard it, and maybe this is who it came from in my mind, is I think Donald Judd, because I think I remember hearing that when I was in Marfa, and I think the tour guide had mentioned that was one of the things that he had said, or that was his perspective on art. And I was recently listening to another podcast that was interviewing his son, Flavin Judd, and he had mentioned that same philosophy as well. And I have this kind of like sneaking suspicion that when you listen to Beyonce's new album, there's a song called Two Hands to Heaven, and there's this one line, ever since I went to Marfa, ain't no trouble on my mind. There's a part of me that wonders, like, did she also get that from experiencing Marfa and experiencing Donald Judd's artworks? I don't know. Can't help but see the connection there. And yeah, on that note, something to chew on, but that's kind of everything that I have prepared for today for this introductory episode to my new podcast. On that last note, on that last train of thought, I actually want to be exploring that a little bit more in the future podcasts as well. So yeah, thank you so much for listening thus far. And please feel free to subscribe to this podcast or my Substack or my Patreon. And please feel free to message me, comment, DM me if there's anything you'd like me to talk about more, or if you had any thoughts or comments or questions you'd like to share. And take care until next time.